Okay, so let's unpack this. You shared this really interesting stack of sources, articles, research, internal notes. Looks like about some, well, pretty significant news coming out of Meta.
Yeah, another wave of layoffs planned for 2025.
Yeah.
But the spin this time, or maybe the focus, is different.
Right, that's what jumped out. They're specifically framing it around low performance, which feels, well, it feels like something we need to dig into.
Exactly. And this material you've gathered, it gives us a chance to go beyond just the headline figure.
Yeah.
It's not just that they're doing it, but maybe why this framing and what it signals about, the bigger picture.
Absolutely. So our mission for this deep dive, using up everything you provided here, is really to understand what low performance actually means at Meta right now, and to explore the underlying reasons for these cuts. Because, like you said, the sources definitely hint it's maybe more complex than just, oh, trimming the fat.
Yeah, there are layers here.
And then, what does this tell us about the tech world more broadly, and maybe even the future of work? Some of these sources suggest some surprising angles, don't they?
They really do. It suggests the official story might be, let's say, strategically curated.
Okay. So let's start with the basics. The core announcement itself, as laid out right here in the sources. Meta is planning a new wave.
Yep. Looks like over 300 to 600 employees potentially affected in 2025.
And the key thing, as mentioned in the material, is that shift in focus. It's not the broad efficiency label we saw before.
Right, like in those earlier, much larger rounds across the industry.
This time, it's explicitly targeting employees identified as, quote, low performers.
Which naturally leads to the next question. What does that even mean in their system? How are they defining low performer?
Well, diving into the material here, the official definition they use in performance reviews seems to be employees meeting some or none of job goals.
Yeah.
Pretty straightforward on paper.
But the sources add some really crucial context around that definition. They paint a picture of an internal environment where there's, well, a lot more pressure on managers.
Pressure to do what, specifically?
To actually identify underperformance, and then crucially to act on it. It's not just identifying, it's the action part that's being stressed.
Okay, and the material also suggests the goalposts are moving, right? The standards themselves.
Exactly. The threshold for what counts as acceptable or meeting expectations seems to be getting higher. It's becoming more demanding.
So it's not just someone falling behind previous standards. The standard itself is rising.
Precisely. Which makes it easier, definitionally, for more people to fall into that low performer category, even if their actual output hasn't changed.
And that shift, that raising of the bar, connects directly to changes in the performance review process itself, according to this material.
Yeah, it seems managers are being, well, strongly encouraged, maybe even required in some ways, to classify a larger percentage of their teams as low performers compared to how things worked before.
A larger share? That's significant.
And there's that quote in the sources from Zuckerberg saying they'll move out low performers faster during what he called an intense year.
Wow. So pretty direct language, not exactly subtle.
Not subtle at all. It's a clear signal being sent down the chain.
And the direct consequence for employees laid out here is stark. Your performance score is now, much more directly tied to whether you keep your job or not.
Yeah, the stakes on those reviews just got a whole lot higher. Suddenly that performance cycle feels very different.
Okay, so that's the performance angle, the pressure, the changing standards. But what's driving that push? Why now? Why this focus?
Well, this is where the other major theme in the source material comes in very strongly. It points towards a massive strategic pivot happening inside Meta.
Which is?
AI. Artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Sources talk about billions, literally billions, being poured into AI infrastructure. Compute power, models, the works.
Okay, big investment. But how does that connect directly to these specific layoffs framed around performance?
The sources draw a very direct line. They state that this restructuring, these cuts, involve eliminating existing positions specifically to free up budget and headcount to hire for AI roles.
Ah, so it's a replacement strategy, essentially. Reallocating resources.
It certainly looks that way. Replacing one type of role or maybe one skill set with another that's deemed more critical for this AI future they're building.
And there's that really specific detail in the material, too, isn't there, about who's being targeted?
Yes, that's striking. It explicitly mentions mid-level engineers as being targeted for AI replacement.
Mid-level engineers specifically, not just general cuts across the board.
Right. It suggests a very deliberate reshaping of their engineering workforce, shifting the balance towards those with cutting-edge AI skills.
Okay, so performance framing, rising standards, pressure on managers, this huge AI investment driving a need for different skills, leading to role replacement, especially for certain engineers. Is that the whole picture, though? Or is this performance part maybe
Yeah.
convenient?
Well, that's where looking at the numbers and some of the process details in the sources gets really, really interesting.
How so? We know the overall cut is about 5%, around 3,600 jobs.
Right. But digging into the process described in the material for identifying those low performers, there's a specific detail about a quota.
A quota? Wait, what kind of quota?
Managers apparently have a target percentage. The sources mention 20%. They need to identify 20% of their employees as falling into that lower performance category.
20%. But the cuts are only 5% overall, so managers have to flag 4 times as many people as will actually be laid off in this wave.
That seems to be the implication based on the material, yes. Identify a broad pool meeting the new, tougher standards from which the actual cuts are made.
Huh. A fixed percentage quota like 20%. That definitely makes it sound less like a pure objective assessment of individual merit against a fixed standard and more like
Like a numbers game. Exactly. The sources suggest this fixed target raises questions about whether it's solely about identifying genuine underperformance or more about meeting a required distribution.
And this feeds into that idea, which is discussed quite a bit in your sources, of this whole thing being a kind of strategic mask. The idea that the performance narrative, finding that 20% against a tougher bar, is perhaps a more palatable way to achieve the real goal.
Which is the AI shift.
Yeah.
Freeing up those resources, those roles, for the new AI talent they desperately want to hire, without causing perhaps as much internal turmoil.
Why mask it, though? Why not just say we're pivoting to AI, and unfortunately that means some roles are changing or being eliminated?
Well, the thinking outlined in the material is about company culture, morale, trust. Admitting directly we're replacing current employees, maybe even you, with AI or AI-focused hires could be incredibly damaging to morale among the people who remain.
Yeah, you'd have massive anxiety, people polishing their resumes.
Exactly. Trust erosion. Loyalty plummets. So framing it around performance, even if the standards are shifting and quotas are involved, might be seen internally as a, I'll say, less destructive way to manage a difficult transition. It preserves a certain narrative, even if it feels less transparent.
And this isn't just happening in a vacuum at Meta, is it? The sources place this in a broader context.
Definitely. The material suggests this is kind of indicative of an industry-wide trend. We've seen workforce adjustments at, Microsoft, Google, Amazon.
Right, those earlier efficiency drives.
And Meta's approach here, this specific playbook of using performance metrics, maybe even quotas, to facilitate a strategic pivot like AI. Well, other tech giants could potentially be watching or even adopting similar tactics.
It also reflects that bigger shift in hiring we're seeing, right? Away from just hiring masses of people.
Yeah, the sources talk about that. A move away from that hyper-growth, broad-based hiring of the past few years towards much more targeted recruitment. Companies are getting really selective, hunting for specific high-demand skills.
Especially in AI, presumably.
Especially in AI. So it's becoming tougher to get in, and maybe, as this meta situation suggests, the requirements to stay in are also becoming more stringent.
What this whole situation really throws into sharp relief, looking at all this material, is that growing tension. It's almost a conflict, isn't it, between traditional ideas of job security and just the sheer speed of technological change.
Absolutely. It creates this palpable sense of uncertainty for people working in tech. Is my role safe? Are my skills still relevant next year?
And it's not just tech, is it? While this is a tech story, the underlying dynamics could ripple outwards.
That's a key point. So bringing this deep dive back to you, the listener, looking closely at Meta, using the material you provided, it's like a real-time case study.
Yeah, you see how a huge company tries to navigate a massive technological shift like AI.
You see how the very idea of performance can be redefined, maybe even manipulated, to serve strategic goals.
And you see that relationship between employer and employee evolving, maybe becoming more transactional.
Perhaps. And understanding these dynamics, even if you're not working at Meta or even in tech, is really valuable. Because these pressures, automations, skill shifts, performance metrics, these strategies could absolutely show up in other industries. Your industry. Your job.
It's a pattern to watch for.
Definitely. So just to quickly recap the main threads we pulled from this material. We started with Meta's planned 2025 layoffs. targeting over 3,600 people.
Right, but framed specifically around low performance.
Then we looked at how low performance is being defined, meeting few goals, but against rising standards and with intense pressure on managers.
And that crucial change in the review process, urging managers to classify a larger share, maybe hitting that 20% quota figure mentioned.
The big why. The massive multi-billion-dollar investment in AI explicitly linked in the sources to eliminating existing roles, particularly mid-level engineers, to hire AI talent.
Which led us to the numbers game idea, the quota suggesting it's not purely about individual merit.
And the strategic mask theory, using the performance narrative to cover the more disruptive AI restructuring, likely to manage internal culture and morale.
Then placing it in the wider tech context, other giants making cuts, the shift to selective hiring, and that overall tension between job security and rapid tech change.
Yeah, it all ties together. Efficiency, the AI imperative, and this redefined notion of performance seem to be the key themes.
It really leaves you with a big question, doesn't it? Building directly on what these sources are showing us. What does this aggressive push towards AI replacement combined with redefining performance using these tougher quota-driven standards? What does that actually mean for how we value different human skills going forward?
Yeah, which skills remain uniquely valuable when the definition of good performance is so tied to adapting to or being replaced by technology?
Exactly. And how might that shift fundamentally change your own relationship with your career, how you think about skilling up or, just navigating the workplace in the years ahead?
It's a really significant thought to chew on. Puts the individual pressure on adaptation, doesn't it?
It really does. Well, thank you for bringing all this source material together. It made for a fascinating deep dive.